I was already dead in my head when I opened the door. You know that feeling when the world goes so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat fighting for space? Because 500 painted faces were sitting their horses in perfect circles around my ranch, and nobody was smiling. Nobody was talking. Not even the wind dared cut in. And the old rule out here says when that many warriors show up at your gate, you don't get to speak, you don't get to breathe. You just become a lesson for the next fool who forgets where he lives. And then the lead rider swung down, steady as a church bell, and said in clean, careful English, "You saved my son. Let me back up a sec, because the way it looks at the end only makes sense if you know the beginning." 3 days earlier, I was mending a line of posts by the north pasture when gunshots rattled out of Devil's Canyon. Not the normal rhythm of a deer hunter or some ranch kid showing off. This was frantic, bunched up, then it cut off fast like a throat getting grabbed. I should have minded my business. Most times out here that's the only way to live long. But something in the silence pulled at me, so I saddled, took my rifle, and rode for the echo that wouldn't sit still. I found the boy half hidden by a dead pony. Small as a bundle of firewood and hot with fever, shoulder grazed, shirt torn, breathing in those skinny, rattly pulls that make you count without meaning to. His fingers were welded around something he didn't want me to see when I tried to pry them. His eyes flew open, and he spoke a stream in his own tongue. No idea what he said, but I understood fear. The ground around us looked like bad math. Too many boot prints, too many horse tracks veering and circling, the kind of pattern that tells you people ran, people fought, people lost. And one set of boot prints peeled off and came back again, like a man who stayed behind to watch the dying. I lifted the boy to my saddle and felt how light he was, how hard he clung to the thing in his fist. We rode home with the sun jabbing my neck and the sound of my horse like a clock running out. He drifted in and out, whispered a few English words that didn't make a sentence. And when we reached my kitchen, he looked right at me through that fever fog and said one word I understood just fine: hide. So I lifted the trap under my table, tucked him into the root cellar with blankets and water and a promise I couldn't guarantee, and I sat on the floorboards above him with my back to the wall and my rifle across my knees, listening to a heartbeat that wasn't mine echoing up through the wood. They came at first light the next day, 6 riders, no badges, not the gallop of honest men. The lead looked like a map of bad decisions, a white scar dragging from eye to jaw. He dismounted with the easy swagger of somebody who breaks things for a living and said morning like we were old friends. Told me they were tracking stolen property, an Indian boy 7, maybe 8. Valuable. He used that word, like you'd tag a calf, and asked if I'd seen him. I told him I hadn't, my voice flat, my foot feeling the ghost of the kid's breath under the boards. Scar smiled with only half his mouth, offered a reward big enough to buy out 5 winters, then let the threat hang like smoke if I was holding back. Yeah, that happened. They finally rode off, dust and contempt trailing behind them. An hour after, I lifted the boards. The boy was awake, eyes too big for his face, and he made a choice I didn't expect. He opened his hand, and in it lay a silver medallion carved with symbols that seemed to catch the thin light and hold it. He said one word in his own tongue, then worked for the English. Father. Over the next 2 nights we learned to talk in pieces, hand signs, a few nouns we shared. His name was Koa. He was 7. The medallion belonged to his father Iana, a chief who'd been working toward peace with ranchers and traders. Men like the scarred rider had raided their camp, stolen the medallion to poison trust, then chased Koa with orders to kill him and plant blame on locals, start the kind of war you don't walk back from. And the thing clutched in that small hand, along with a button he'd torn off, a broken spur with a strange notch, a folded note with a name, was proof of the whole rotten plot. On the 3rd morning, he tugged my sleeve and pointed to the horizon. Just we know you're lying. We found blood and sign, and all the truth you tried to sweep under God's rug. They spread out to flank my house. Scar pitched the reward again. His hand settled on his pistol like it had its own opinion, and then a low drumbeat started from the north ridge, distant and steady, not a threat so much as a certainty. The hunters went pale the way men do when they're finally introduced to consequences. Voices got tight. 2 of them moved for my steps, and the drum stopped on a blade. Silhouettes rimmed the ridge. Eyes on my porch not blinking at all. Here's the twist I didn't see coming. Before a single hand signal or war cry, Scar panicked and raised his pistol at me, shaking like he'd finally noticed he was made of meat, and a horn sounded from the riders with a sound so deep you feel it in your teeth. Formation snapped, bows lifted, lances flexed. My choices were down to one thin line. So I stepped back to my open door and said, Koa, your father's here. It's time. Scar cursed, realized I'd had the boy all along. And in that breath the floor creaked and the kid appeared, small, pale, but standing straight with that medallion, throwing a coin of sunlight across our yard like the day had been waiting for it. The hunters found themselves trapped in a story that didn't care how they wanted it to end. One of Scar's men hissed, shoot now, like a devil on a drunk's shoulder. But the leader couldn't make his hand obey. Iana slid off his horse before it stopped moving. Koa ran. They met with a sound I won't describe because there isn't a word clean enough. And that should have been the end of it. But greed is a stubborn ghost. Scar dragged his pistol back up toward the boy's spine. My rifle answered first. He folded hard. His gun flew. And the rest of them finally saw the shape of their own funeral. Arrows raised around us like a forest you don't walk through. Drop them, I said. And to their credit or shame they did. Iana approached me then, eyes measuring the space between us like something permanent was being built there. My son says you hit him, he said. Any decent man would, I told him. Koa emptied his little leather pouch onto the ground. The broken spur, the button, the note, the medallion that glittered like stubborn hope. Iana's face hardened. Scar looked around and decided he loved breathing more than loyalty. It was Morrison, he spat. Land speculator back east. Wanted the treaty to fail so he could buy cheap when bodies cooled. You know the type, the kind that drinks money like water and never asks where it came from. What happened next still moves through me when the nights get too quiet. The warriors didn't swarm me, didn't cheer. They broke formation slowly and came one by one like men walking up to a graveside to speak their single honest word. An older fighter put his hand on my shoulder and said, brother. Morrison's name inked into a ledger that finally meant something. Weeks passed, and the camp pitched closer to my place than any map would draw it. Not because we needed each other to survive, but because we did better work when we looked each other in the eye. Iana and I talked fence lines and water rights, and how a boy can carry fear longer than a bullet. Koa healed. Slept bad for a while, then started teaching his cousins track marks in my yard like he'd decided memory was a tool, not a weight. The medallion went home to the lodge where it belonged. But its meaning changed, not a badge of one man's power. And I think about that first word Koa said to me, hide, how it turned into the last word Iana gave me before he mounted up the day the new agreement was signed. He looked at his son, looked at me, and said the thing fathers say when they've crossed a river and not everyone made it. You saved my son, and then he added, and my son saved us all. So here's where I leave it open for you. Not because I don't have an opinion, but because stories belong to the people who hear them too. Was I right to keep him hidden until the last second? Should I have ridden out sooner? Should Iana have risked parley without proof? What do we owe each other when somebody rich and far away tries to buy a war with other people's blood? You tell me. What counts as justice when truth arrives a heartbeat before violence? And how would your town, your family, your heart handle that kind of test? You know what I mean? If this story moved you, share what you think below. Who was right? Who was wrong? What justice should look like when a community is pulled tight between fear and courage? And if you've got a better ending in mind, say it out loud. That's how places like this get safer. One argued over truth at a time.